The tradition continues.
Calvary, global to the world 24/7.
Tradition continues.
Calvary.
An Israeli airstrike near Gaza City has killed at least 15 people in the early hours of Monday morning. It follows Sunday's attacks that left dozens dead, including 2 Red Cross workers. They were killed in a strike on their home. On Friday, the home of pediatrician Dr. Ala Al-Najjar was also bombed. 9 of her 10 children were killed. The largest swarm of Russian air attacks launched on Ukraine since the war began 3 years ago has killed at least 12 people. Officials in Kyiv say 367 drones and missiles were launched across the country in a second night of mass attacks. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's unhappy with Vladimir Putin for carrying out those attacks.
I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
Well, the U.S. president also says tariffs will not be increased on the European Union just yet. After speaking to the EU Commission president, Ursula von der Leyen said more time was needed to reach a deal. Trump had warned EU imports would be taxed up to 50% from June 1st, but that deadline has now been extended until July 9th. Trump says both sides now have a chance to come up with a mutually agreeable number. Voting has ended in Venezuela for a new parliament, and state opposition party boycotted the election over last year's disputed re-election of President Nicolas Maduro. Dozens of critics, including opposition ally Juan Pablo Guanipa, were arrested ahead of the vote. And Fenerbahce have won European basketball's top prize, the EuroLeague, beating AS Monaco 81-70 in Abu Dhabi. This is the stage of the competition before.
Tradition continues.
Calvary.
Reports of progress. On the ground, Israeli strikes on Tuesday morning have killed 7 more Palestinians. A huge fire erupted after missiles targeted a diesel plant in Deir el-Balah. At least 1 person has been killed and 2 others injured in Russian shelling in Ukraine's Sumy region. Earlier, the governor there said Russia had captured 4 villages. It comes as Moscow carries out its heaviest bombing in the war, and it's leaving U.S. President Donald Trump angry actions.
Well, it wasn't us who initiated a coup in Ukraine, you know. All the time they told us we needed democracy. Kept going. They went on to suppress Donbass and so on. They were destroying people there from helicopters and airplanes. It's just ridiculous. They forced us to do what we're doing now, and in the meantime, they're trying to blame us.
The second day of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit has kicked off in Malaysia. Leaders are looking to further trade and diplomatic ties after U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs upended global trade norms in April. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim is holding talks with Chinese Premier Qing and Gulf states, state dignitaries in Kuala Lumpur.
This is, in our experience in this region, quite extraordinary. To be able to bring not only ASEAN leaders, but the most dynamic GCC countries into this region to work together, build on trust, cooperation, and true friendship.
The disastrous end to a football victory parade in the UK city of Liverpool is not being treated as terrorism. At least 27 people are in hospital and another 20 were injured when a car plowed into crowds. Police say a 53-year-old British man was arrested moments after the car was surrounded by onlookers and police.
Calvary.
In Gaza, Israeli air and land attacks have left at least 23 Palestinians dead and many wounded. According to Palestinian hospital sources, 12 people were killed in several attacks in Gaza City. A drone targeted a soup kitchen operating out of a former school serving as a shelter. Results were also reported in Beit Lahia, Jabalia, Nusayrat and Khan Yunis. While the attacks continue, Palestinians are still facing the threat of starvation. It culminated on Tuesday during chaotic scenes at a newly opened aid distribution center in Rafah. Israeli soldiers fired warning shots on large crowds of desperate people trying to get food at the center run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The U.S. State Department has defended its plan, claiming aid is reaching Gaza on a massive scale.
The real story here, the story is that aid and food is moving into Gaza at a massive scale at this point when you're looking at 8,000 food boxes. Was this going to be like going to the mall?
Around 1,200 Israeli army personnel, including active officers and reservists, have signed an open letter to the government and military leaders. They're demanding an immediate end to the hostilities in Gaza and for all hostages to be safely returned. Russia says it's repelled a massive attack from Ukraine on Wednesday morning, shooting down 112 drones coming across the border. Some were on their way to Moscow before they were destroyed. The attack comes hours after U.S. President Donald Trump warned Vladimir Putin he's playing with fire. The Trump administration plans to cancel overseas. A New York Times leak says agencies are ordered to end deals and seek new suppliers.
Calvary.
Israeli airstrikes and ground assaults have continued unabated, killing at least 57 people across Gaza on Wednesday. In Gaza City, there were scenes of chaos as thousands of starving Palestinians trying to find food stormed a World Food Program warehouse. At least 4 people were killed in the incident. The United Nations and other international aid groups have criticized the situation on the ground in Gaza, calling it an unfolding humanitarian catastrophe. After reports suggesting that ceasefire talks between Hamas and the U.S. were underway, Washington's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, has confirmed that he will send a new proposal to all parties soon. He has also expressed optimism for the end of the war in Gaza.
I have some very good feelings about getting to a long-term resolution, temporary ceasefire, and a long-term...
A U.S. federal court has blocked Donald Trump's Liberation Day import tariffs from going into effect. It ruled Trump had overstepped his authority with steeper duties on China and the European blocs. The Trump administration is pushing to cap international enrollment at Harvard at 15% and demands student data. Harvard has filed suit and a federal judge has issued a temporary block. The move is part of a broader crackdown on foreign students nationwide. Meanwhile, White House has also announced plans to aggressively revoke visas held by Chinese students studying in the U.S. President Donald Trump says Vladimir Putin may be intentionally delaying negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. Trump also expressed disappointment at heavy Russian bombing over the weekend. Shortly after Donald Trump's comments, Moscow suggested at least 70 Palestinians were killed in Israeli strikes across Gaza on Thursday. That is, as Israel has agreed to a U.S. ceasefire proposal for Gaza. Hamas says it is still reviewing the struggle to access the limited amount of aid that has been let into the Gaza Strip. Humanitarian groups are again urging the international community to stop the suffering. Move a grave violation of international law, while the UN warns it pushes efforts for a two-state solution in the wrong direction. The expansion across the occupied West Bank. Yemen's Houthis fired a hypersonic ballistic missile at Israel's Ben Gurion airport near Tel Aviv on Thursday, leading to flights being temporarily suspended. The army confirmed a missile launched from Yemen was intercepted by the country's air defense systems. At least 2 people have been killed in separate Israeli airstrikes on southern Lebanon. The Israeli army, which claims to be targeting Hezbollah, has continued bombing parts of Lebanon despite a November ceasefire. A federal appeals court has allowed President Donald Trump to resume collecting tariffs. It temporarily halts a ruling that had declared many of the tariffs illegal. Trump says the court ruling on tariffs was wrong and hopes the Supreme Court will overturn the decision.
And any questions over whether President Trump improperly imposed these IEEPA tariffs were by Senator Rand Paul and Democrats to terminate the president's reciprocal tariffs. The courts should have no role here. There is a troubling and dangerous trend of unelected judges inserting themselves into the presidential decision-making process.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has urged both Russia and Ukraine not to shut the door on dialogue as Istanbul prepares to host a potential new round of peace talks. This comes after Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has stated that Moscow and Kyiv wanted a second round of talks to be held here in Istanbul.
Calvary.
Gaza's entire population is at risk of famine. That is the warning from the United Nations, which says the enclave that is home to nearly 2.3 million Palestinians is the hungriest place on earth. The Israeli army has kept up its relentless bombing across the Gaza Strip. At least 54 Palestinians were killed on Friday. President Donald Trump has hinted that a ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel is imminent.
They're very close to an agreement on Gaza, and we'll let you know about it during the day or maybe tomorrow, and we have a chance of that.
The Israeli army says it has struck a weapon storage facility in Syria's coastal cities of Latakia and Tartus. These are the first such strikes in nearly a month. Israel has repeatedly targeted Syria following the fall of the Assad regime in December. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has discussed a ceasefire in Ukraine with President Volodymyr Zelensky in a phone call ahead of talks in Istanbul next week. President Erdogan has reaffirmed Turkey's commitment to elections. Anti-corruption protests have been held regularly during the past 7 months, following the collapse of a train station roof that killed 16 justice for the crash victims. The U.S. Supreme Court has cleared the way for the Trump administration to strip the temporary legal status of hundreds of thousands of migrants. The move by the Supreme Court bolsters Donald Trump's drive to continue deportation. And Trump says he plans to double tariffs on steel imported into the U.S. The increase from 25% to 50% is set to take effect next week. Donald Trump argues the move will further secure the American steel industry, but concerns remain that it could push prices even higher. Meanwhile, Trump says he will no longer be quote, Mr. Nice Guy with China on trade. He has accused Beijing of violating an agreement to mutually roll back tariffs and trade restrictions for